I've had some seriously heavy and scary moments as an investor in the last 14 years, but the story I'm about to tell you will absolutely take the cake. So regardless of where you're listening, hope you can have a laugh at my expense and most importantly, learn from my experience. In 2011, I just finished university and I was accepted into IBM's global graduate program, which for me felt like I was going to sort of like the Super Bowl of global companies and finally getting to play with the big boys and to get to be around people like myself. Now, when I got to that business, I realized that most of the people inside there, myself included, were just excited for the day to end and for the opportunity to be financially free and to have a life filled with the choices that they really wanted in the future. So that year I went and bought my first property, which is a 2-bedroom little unit with a couple of mates on the south side of Sydney in a little suburb called Veranda. But later that year, I actually was able to save another deposit. Now, this was just after the GFC when they were giving away money for almost nothing. I think you could put down 2.5% to 5% deposits at the time. And because I was just getting started, I think they were scrapping lenders' mortgage insurance as well. So it was a lot easier then to get in. But basically what I was doing was on the weekends, I was driving around all the way around Wollongong, all the way around the Central Coast and Newcastle, looking at suburbs, properties with my little Residex top suburbs guide. And I'd reduced it down to all of the suburbs like any good first, second time investor that had the most potential upside for growth in the shortest amount of time. So I had a suburb on the Central Coast that I'd been looking at. I organized 11 inspections on that day. The suburb was called San Remo. I remember there was an article actually in the Sydney Telegraph, which I've still got in my scrapbook, saying, is San Remo the Africa of Australia? At the time, the suburb looked absolutely amazing in terms of speculative potential, coming off the back of less than 1% growth for the 10 years leading up until 2011. But the problem was at that time, I had no idea how to read demographics, manage my team of property managers, building and pest inspectors, town planners, solicitors. And so I didn't really look at the ABS data, which at the time, I think the Centrelink payment for an average household was $400, and the average household income in San Remo at the time was $410 a week. So the other thing that I didn't look at from the ABS at the time was the fact that 80 to 85% of the people living in the suburb were renters, with about 10 to 15% of the people there being owner occupied. But driving around, the suburb looked better than where I'd been living at for my uni accommodation. And after spending my whole day with one agent, getting shown shit property after shit property, just happened to be the last property that he showed me on the day was the one that we wanted. Now, this home was a 5-bedroom, double-story home that was absolutely fucked in the worst condition you've ever seen, with a little 1-bedroom granny flat out the back. Now, as a young guy, picking up this property for $213K with $600 a week was like, I made it. I'm on my way to financial freedom. I was so excited. I'm like, if I can get 2 of these, then I'm basically getting $800 a week of passive income, and my living costs at the moment are only $25,000 a year. I'll be financially free before my 26th birthday. This is my like crazy mind at the time. I thought that it was all going to work out. So me being the sort of low risk investor that I am, I'd been to a seminar. She'd scared the absolute shit out of me. A lot of you guys are probably going to Dimphner and she's done the same to you. And she's like, make sure you have your certifications in place. So I'm like, I'll double check with the council that all the certifications are in place to sublet the house to 3 separate people. Silly me at the time, had no idea what I was doing, called the head of town planning in the, I think it's the Wyong Council up there in Gosford. And he's like, dude, you can't do that at all. And by the way, we're sending someone out to look at the property. This guy's come around to the property and he's like, you've got to rip out the kitchen downstairs, rip out all of the internal walls downstairs if you want to rent the house and the granny flat out separately. And by the way, your granny flat needs some work to tidy it up. So we've just gone, shit, this was just a quick call about certification. We ended up having to spend a whole bunch of money going through that process over the course of a year and getting it all certified. And all of a sudden, my amazing property looks like a liability that has gone from $600 a week down to $200 at the start, and then up to $400 once I got the granny flat sorted out as well. But this isn't the story at all. This is just the start of it. So, what I believed in those early days as an investor is if you've got a property manager with like Ray White or First National or whoever else, that that person cares about the property as much as you do, and you don't have to manage that person. So, I basically went up to that property when I first bought it, and I spent 3 days up there on the beers with my mates, completely hand painted the house top to bottom, tidied up the garden, replaced the carpets ourselves, fixed up all the door handles, and then I didn't go back to the property for 6 years. Now, about 6 years later, I'm coming on a road trip from Queensland to Sydney. I'd moved back to Queensland by that point. And I'm like, I'm coming straight past the property. I may as well drop in. So I got my mate who's a builder to come and meet me. And I've got my property manager on site. And I've looked at the property from the front walking in. The grass is about shoulder high almost. And I've gone, fuck, what have I done? I walked out. The granny flat has a cord going from the front home into the backyard. And I'm like, that seems suspect. And it was all locked up. And I'm like, the property manager's like, we haven't been able to go into the granny flat for a while now. And I'm just like, okay, I don't really know what's going on. I get into the property and it's supposed to be a single mum with a couple of kids and a dog living in the place. I found out that she's been subleasing the property to about 11 people and the place is trashed. Like I'm talking absolutely trashed. And so I've come out of the property and my face is as white as a ghost. These people were crazy. I've looked at the property manager. She's just looked at me and then looked at the ground and looked back at me. And I'm like, we've got to breach this tenant. So we've breached the tenant and told them that they need to do all these things to sort of get it back into some sort of like condition that it was in before. And we've given them a chance because she was a single mum. I've sort of given her the benefit of the doubt. My property manager, I don't hear from her from about 8 weeks. And then about 8 weeks after that, I get a call from her and it's a Thursday afternoon. And she's like, Ben, I'm out the front of your property in San Remo on the Central Coast. It's on fire. And I'm like, what the fuck's going on? So I'm in the office at the time. I've got a full day of sessions booked out. I've like ended the session and I've run straight to my computer and I've gone through all of my emails and thankfully I had insurance on the place at that time. Now, I was with Allianz at that time. I've never gone through another claim since then or before then, but they were absolutely fantastic to me all the way through that journey. So she's like, I'll call you back once this is resolved. And this is where like the saga and the story really kicks off. I get a call from her the next day. I'm sweating on it all night, not knowing what's going on. And she's like, Ben, did you see your property was on the news in Sydney last night? I'm like, what are you talking about? She's like, apparently some detectives had rocked up to the property because of a tip from one of the neighbours. And as they've got to the property, this property that's been there for 30 years has all of a sudden caught on fire as the police have rocked up to the house for a visual inspection. And apparently everybody that's living inside the house, there was about 8 people at the time, have gone running in all different directions. Apparently the cops have caught a couple of them. Everybody else has just fled from the property. And so when I got a call from like the chief of police after, and I got a call from like the head of the fire department in the local area, they're like, Ben, do you know what's up with your property? And I'm like, I've got no idea. I just know that the tenants, have been trashing the place. And they're like, we've just found one of the largest ice slabs in your granny flat in New South Wales history. I'm just like, oh my gosh, what are these people been doing? And so apparently when the police have rocked up and the couple of people that they've caught, they've put them in cuffs and in the back of the paddy wagon. I had no idea because I hadn't been into the street, but apparently there was a couple of other people that all had like restraining orders against like the people living in the house. And when the cops are like doing the fire thing, all of the neighbors have started to come out with like cricket bats, baseball bats, golf clubs, and literally started to go to absolute town on these people. There ended up being something like 12 cop cars there, a video crew capturing the fire, and this scene in the street went on for like 3 or 4 hours well, it was almost like a mini riot. And so I wish that's where it ended, but that's not where it ended. The day after, I've called the insurance company and I've just gone, look, I've just got a call. Here's like the chief of police, here's the fire department, here's my insurance details. Can you please send like whoever out to the property to like go through this journey? I haven't done it before. And so they've sent someone out there. It took about 2 or 3 months to get a report back on what they were going to do about it all. But during that period of time, because apparently like rival people in the area knew that that house was like basically an ice lab, they've broken into my property like 6 times. So through the front doors, all of the windows smashed. They've ripped out so many of my internal walls looking for drugs or money or whatever else they were after. It got to a point where it had got broken in so many times. And at this point, I'm out of pocket like $20,000 just trying to make the place like secure and tight. The house is absolutely trashed. The granny flat's fully burnt down in the backyard. And it's getting pretty stressful. Like I've got a young family at this time. I've got a really young business and I'd spent all of my money like on a house and another investment that I was doing. And I'm like, if this continues for much longer, like it's not going to be good. I don't know what I'm going to do with the bank loan, which was minimal, but still stressful with a young family. And so they've continued to break in. And then over a series of time, the insurance company's finally like gone, well, the house is the house, and I couldn't really do anything about that. Like the fact that multiple people had broken in since the original claim meant that like the tenants weren't liable and therefore they couldn't go after them. And so the house was just fucked and that was my problem now. But the granny flat had been burnt down and so they agreed to pay us about $90,000, which we used to remove the granny flat and get rid of it. I found out it was all asbestos, so that cost a fortune. And then we went into the property and started to fix it up. And it was crazy. Like they literally drove a car through the bottom story of the property. It was so intense. Like there was people had been squatting in the house since it had been empty. There were like knives in there. There were like heaps of things that people had been injecting, like stuff. It ended up taking us like, I think the 16 cubic meter like containers, I think we ended up needing to get 5 of them and having to get rid of 4 cars off the property. Like it was such a nightmare. About 9 months after the call, we'd finally got the property, market ready. And I'm just like, I just can't, I can't deal with this anymore. So on the last week, I went down to Sydney and me and my mate spent a bit of time. My dad came round too and we sort of fixed up the backyard and, laid the grass after my mate had been there for like 7 months doing it all himself. And I look back and I'm like, I'm so sorry, dude. He's like, man, I was carrying out syringes and shit. That we're putting the grass down, having a beer, looking at the place going like, thank you, this is like finally okay. And the neighbour sticks his head over the fence and he's like, man, do you mind if I come round for a beer? I've got a few stories for you guys about the last 6 years. Here's this poor guy living next to this like basically drug den with his kids. And so he comes over and he's like, man, just before the place burnt down, one of the people on ice came out of the property and was just screaming. And it was a 2-story place and he's standing on the balcony and he's like screaming, I'm going to jump off the balcony. And the neighbor's just looking at him and he's like, do it then. Like just like said it for some reason. This guy's looked at him through the window and jumped off the balcony on drugs, landed on his feet and came running around the property to his front door and he's smashing on the front door, but luckily it was locked. He's gone from that house to the next one and opened up the front door and apparently the neighbor's like, dude, if you come into this property, I'm going to have to defend myself. And the guy's on ice or something and just not hearing anything, going crazy. The guy gets one of those like $100 samurai swords off his wall as this guy comes through his property and our neighbor's saying he stabbed the guy with the samurai sword, luckily through the non-heart side. It went through his shoulder and out his back. This is just a normal dude, apparently like a neighbor, and it's gone through his body and he's just gone, holy shit, the guy on ice has grabbed the sword with both hands like something out of a zombie movie, picked it up and thrown it on the floor, looked at himself and started screaming, ran out the front door into the coconut tree out the front and knocked himself out on the ground. He's like, dude, that's one story from like 1 month living next to these people for the last 5 years. And I just felt so sorry for him. But like, I suppose the experience taught me so much. One is manage your managers. The second is always make sure you've got insurance on your property that is up to date. After that, I went and set up something in Microsoft to do, which is a free online tool basically to record like things. And I basically put all of the addresses of all of my properties with all of the insurance details and the dates. And I, at that point forward, started to work only with an insurance broker because that process of 9 months was so stressful. Like I had so many sleepless nights and just call after call after call. All of that could have been avoided if I had have talked to my property manager more regularly, if they had have gone through the property, if I had have looked at the reports they were sending through to me. But thankfully, it all ended up working out okay. The silver lining was that we did get some money from the insurance company, nowhere near enough to cover all of the damages. But because, I'd had that Residex report, which unfortunately they no longer produce, I was able to buy that property for $213K, spend about $100,000 on it, fixing it up over time. And then obviously got out of that property for mid 500s, paid the government a whole bunch of tax, but was just so happy to wipe my hands of that property. What's crazy is recently I went back and looked at the suburb just to sort of see what was going on. And those sorts of houses are now selling for $600,000 to $800,000. Instead of 80% renters, it's now 85% mums and dads. And the average household income's gone from $410 a week back then to about $1,800 to $2,000, per week per household. So, I'm glad that San Remo's figured its stuff out. I personally don't think I could ever stomach buying another property down there. But it's taught me some incredible lessons. Hope nothing like this ever happens to you. Like, it was so intense going through it. But I'm stronger for it. And I hope you've been able to have a bit of a laugh at my expense today. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Surely you can give me a thumbs up for this one. And if you've had any horror stories or crazy shit happen to you with your properties, please share them down below so that other people can realize there is a great side to property investing, but it's not always rosy. But as long as you have a solution-orientated approach, a good team of advisors, and good insurance in place, then most of the bumps and bruises can be weathered over time. But hope nothing like this happens to you. I wish you all the best on your journey, and I hope you've enjoyed this vid.
Woo! That's a wrap.
That's a wrap.
Getting cool, bro. Yeah.
Oh, sweaty. So sweaty. Oh, that's good. That's so nice.